Well, it's top of the hour, so I'm just going to turn the YouTube on because that's where we get our recording. And I will welcome folks. We're glad you're here and thanks for joining us. My name is Stephen Fetter. I manage the United Learning Program for the General Counsel Office, and it is always my pleasure to gather with you folks to talk about all things financial and church as we plow our way through the pandemic and the routine of this important ministry as well. We've got a really valuable topic tonight, I think. I was looking through the slides and realizing there's stuff here for treasurers who've been doing this a while. It's always helpful to have a refresher on what the job entails. And this is going to be a comprehensive event tonight. There's a lot of material to cover, and I'm looking forward to it just as you are. So let me remind you again that because we've got 105 people in the room, we can't just open our mics and all have a free-flowing conversation. We're going to ask you to use the chat in Zoom to ask your questions. I'm also watching the chat over at YouTube. And so if you're joining us from there and you have a question, you're about 15 or 20 seconds behind us, but I'll see the question. And every so often in the agenda, there's a spot to stop. And at that point, I'll try to pick up all of the questions that have come in and mush them together. So if three people are asking the same thing, we won't ask it three times. So that's my role in the process, but Eric is our main presenter, and I'm going to turn things over to him and let him take it away. Over to you, Eric.
Okay, thank you. Good evening, everyone. And as advertised, I do see a lot of veteran treasurers on the call tonight too, but we are trying to provide sort of a high-level overview of the entire job, and in particular with an emphasis of pointing people to resources. So some of it, for those of you who've been participating in these webinars all along, some of this will be redundant, but hopefully there'll be one or two things that work for you. And I always say when to pay special attention. So 95% of the job should be pretty locked in standard business as usual. But when you hit something unusual, that's when I strongly recommend you either do some research or pick up the phone and send us an email just to make sure. So we'll be kicking things off tonight, as we always do, with a land acknowledgement. And here I say wherever you are. So I've got my portion of the land acknowledgement that I think and I hope applies to all of us. But we in Toronto acknowledge that we are on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. And Toronto is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We are grateful for the opportunity to live and work here, and we thank all the generations of people who have taken care of this land for thousands of years. This recognition must also be clearly and overtly connected to our collective commitment to make the promise and the challenge of truth and reconciliation real in our communities. And with that, here's the agenda for tonight. We're going to go over the job at kind of a high level, but there should be some reminders in there. There will be some things that if your treasurer in your setting may or may not be doing. We'll be talking a little bit about the governance aspect and balancing acts, and then we'll go into some of the topics that have been big for us the last while, the online tools being up to date, when to pay special attention, and always contacts and reference materials. So the goal today is to help you, the new treasurer, and maybe the longstanding treasurer, do the work, but flag possible problems and risks. And when I say that, I don't ever tell people you must do this, okay? Because the treasurer is one person on a board, and sometimes you're delivering different messages. You're the messenger. I always say, hey, if you're not aware of and following the rules around part-time employees, When, if and when you get a big fine from the CRA, make sure you're not wearing it alone. So we flag problems and risks, and we try to offer you the 100% technically correct solution to a problem. But I quite often say, fix it going forward. Like sometimes it's either too complicated or the amounts are immaterial or something. It isn't always worth the hassle to do everything perfectly. So as I always do, I start off by saying thank you for being a treasurer. So the big picture of and why charity law in particular is a sticky thing is because there are tax implications. So there are still, when I first did this, there were 86,000 charities. And I checked today and there still are. And that means probably about 5 or 10,000 have fallen away and 5 or 10,000 new ones have come aboard. It represents $11 billion in donations in 2020. I say 2 billion hours of volunteer time. And if I was running a real workshop in person, my joke would be, and 90% of that is the United Church because of the manual. But nonetheless, the United Church certainly can complicate things sometimes for all of us. And there is a significant tax revenue implication. So that's the reason we have a lot of the rules. And sometimes it's frankly easier to be a nonprofit that isn't a charity. Then there's all kinds of things you can do that you can't do as a charity. Again, if we were in person, or I suppose I could poll this, but I'm not going to, but just to give you a sense that we're probably wrestling with a number of common themes. Most of us are working from an old building that has deferred maintenance. Most of us, not all. All of us are struggling to break even. Then there's the question of the insurance plan, the UCC Protect that we've talked about. We've been talking about changes to that program that could be coming if the General Counsel approves that this summer. Formal financial review or audit. Lots of people still think that you absolutely must have an audit, and they're finding that that's an expensive thing. And we'll speak to that a little bit later. And then CRA has various newsletters, but I would strongly recommend subscribing to their charities feed just to see. Most of the time you can just delete it, but if there's something there that affects you, you'll know right away without having to wait for a webinar. So again, keeping it really simple, the things you must do as a treasurer or must make sure somebody's doing is meet payroll, right? People got to get paid. And the related CRA reporting, that includes payroll reporting, but also the annual charitable return. The first thing in the manual is you must pay staff. The second is pay one's annual assessment. Proper tax receipting is another thing that the CRA cares a lot about, again, because of the tax consequence. So if you stay on side with the CRA, the rest is probably stuff you deal with in some part of your life, paying bills, keeping books, budgeting to some degree, communicating. It might just be in the family, it might be your business, whatever it is. But for most folks who've stepped into the treasurer role, everything else flows from these 4 main points here. Okay, so that was must do. Should do, again, best practice is to have good controls and caution around cash custody and counting. If one person is handling all that, there's a risk. Most of the time there isn't, but my message to people when we talk about cash custody and count, 2 counters, segregation of duties, there's an old line in the fraud business, which is a successful fraud is never committed by someone who wasn't trusted. So note the double negative, right? And the church frauds, and we see or become aware of 1 or 2 every year, or the ones you read about in the Observer or something, are, some wonderful, beloved, trusted person for years and years and years. And all of a sudden there's, in one case, 420,000 missing from the bank account. So should do these days, I didn't say this when I first created these slides, online access current. We'll talk a bit about that. And those of you who've been on for the last couple of years are probably sick of hearing it, and you're already probably pretty current too. The idea of having again, the treasurer not being alone, ideally you would have some form of finance or administration support committee that might have the building person on it, might have a trustee on it, both as a sounding board, but also frankly to give the treasurer cover, okay, because you are delivering some tough messages periodically. Again, it's normal. One should have adequate backup, whether it's for the volunteer job or whether it's backing up your files, whether it's a backup for your computer records. I know of at least 2 churches this past year who've lost all their computer records due to ransomware, and unfortunately, they were insured with our cyber coverage, so that they at least got professional help getting that fixed up. In an annual stewardship campaign, that's not normally the job of a treasurer, but wanting the top line or the revenue side to grow is a pretty good thing for any treasurer, or if you're running a business or a family for that matter. Now, nice to have. It's nice to have the best independent review of financial statements you can find and afford. But if you can't afford an audit, it's one I'd actually recommend cutting. And many folks have these days, like a formal audit by an accountant. A narrative budget is a good thing to have when you can explain the church numbers either with pictures or with description of activity as opposed to just columns of numbers. So that's something that I put in place, frankly, wherever I've been a treasurer, not just in church. The stewardship side, again, isn't the treasurer's job, but the treasurer's job is easier if some of these elements are in place. Periodic review of the mission and priorities of the board. The narrative budget, if you have it, typically makes the budget more accessible to more people. Some kind of annual stewardship, and just keep saying thank you at every opportunity. I'm sure you do that. I'm sure your congregation does it. But in my opinion, sometimes we assume someone's doing it. You can't say thank you often enough. So for these basics, hopefully as a new treasurer, you're inheriting an existing process. It might be existing spreadsheets. It might be, someone walked you through how things work and how things come together, and you can just focus on the routine things, making sure that the cash gets recorded and revenue counted, and existing reporting. The first thing to do is do it the way you've always done it. Like, do it the way you understood what you inherited, but then work on understanding why it is that way. And if your predecessor can't explain to you why something is the way it is, it might be worth looking into. It could be something that you don't have to do. It could be something that maybe isn't being done correctly, and you'll make it that much easier for the person following you. On the donation side, sometimes the most complexity arises with conditional or restricted donations. And there's no such thing as a conditional donation for a charitable receipt. You either accept the money or you don't, but you do need to look at the terms of a gift if something is specified. And my own church story, which some of you may have heard, had the son of a recently deceased member say, "Mom always wanted a flagpole on this corner, and I'm going to give you all the money to have that flagpole installed." And I went to my board and I said, I don't particularly want a flagpole. Do any of you have a view on this? And we agreed that the neighborhood probably wouldn't even like the idea of a flagpole. So we had to say no to a very significant sum of money. So on donations, 95, 98% of the time, you just process them and you follow the existing established methodology. But 2 or 3% of the time, you might want to have a closer look. If something sounds complicated, it's worth paying attention, as I said in the title of this presentation. Counting and recording. We talked about fraud a little bit. 2 counters rotating is best practice. I think you can appreciate the reasons for that. No collusion, backing each other up, separate set of eyes, and all that kind of stuff. But I'll tell you, my church almost never does this, and we happen to accept that as a risk because it's a bigger hassle changing it. So here I am telling you what to do, but I'm also telling you my own church doesn't do it. Segregation of duties, again, there's a limit to what you can do when you have an office of one, or it's pretty tough to segregate that. Or you have a limited number of volunteers. So on the counting and the recording, the treasurer shouldn't be involved, but often is. And so what you want to do is do these things with your eyes open. And the whole idea is to have enough safeguards in place so that you're covered, your butt is covered. I'm going to say that. Should there ever be a circumstance where accusations are made or something untoward is said, you want to make sure that you're covered as a treasurer, because it simply isn't worth it. Job's hard enough without putting up with that kind of hassle. So paying the bills, we all do that in our regular lives. So payroll, regular invoices, gifts to qualified donees, benevolent, all of these things are to be expended for the charitable purpose of the church. So if you're paying someone, it's because they're either helping deliver your program, they're helping support your administration, they're helping fix the building or something, but it's related to the charitable purpose of the church. Benevolent payments, I flag here. Quite a number of churches have benevolent programs, but you have to take the special care with benevolent programs because, as well intended as it is, a charity can't give money to an individual. That's I'm gonna leave it in those broad terms. It's called private benevolence. So you can give give money to an organization, but giving money to an individual is offside, and quite often there are well-intended situations. It could be a family wrestling with medical payments. It could be any number of things. You need to be very careful with benevolent programs. And typically I've actually spoken to a CRA rep who has said, we don't want any money, any dollars, period, to be going out in benevolent programs. We want you to either pay a rent bill or give out food cards or something. Now, when I say that, I've talked to a CRA rep, I could talk to 3 others who might offer me a different story. So I'm not saying that's an absolute rule, unless they have it in writing, and unless they enforce it, there may be a little wriggle room there. So here's the thing that I learned. It took me a couple of years as a treasurer to learn when I first started at church, and it's basically don't wear it yourself. Okay, if your numbers aren't good, first I inherited a big deficit my first year. It wasn't my deficit. I just did some spreadsheets. However, it's hard not to make that personal sometimes. So you've got to make sure that it's, and then somebody like me shows up, or Clyde or Angelica, and they tell you a bunch of other rules. Okay, and we tell you rules about the use of restricted funds, or maybe the trustees kind of try to control things, or fee policy for weddings and funerals and so on, or whether you can get away with not putting someone on payroll and taking source deductions. We share all the rules. If you have to go back as a treasurer and tell your board that they've been doing it wrong for the last 20 years, you have to figure out what hill to die on, frankly. Like so certain of them are more important than others. They might be more material. If we're talking about $100 a year, maybe you just let it go. If you're talking thousands of dollars, you better speak up. So I just want to say, when I present this slide, this is from my live presentation days. The two fundamental rules of being a treasurer are: it's not about me, and now that's number one. And again, don't wear it. And number two, and my own local UCW authorized me to use these words, so I will use them. But you could say, do not mess with, do not unduly upset. But my UCW said I was allowed to say, do not piss off your UCW. And the reason we say that is they're a powerhouse. The volunteer energy, if you have a UCW, it's a fundraising machine. It's a volunteer machine. It is something, there aren't as many as there used to be, but do not blank your UCW. So I always say, and there's some treasurers on this call that have been around for 20 or 30 years on the job and been trying to unload it for 18 or 19 of those years, right? It's trying to ensure a smooth transition with your predecessor is great. That's perfect world. You have someone you can job shadow, you can work with for a time. A whole bunch of us, myself included, got dropped into it with nothing. Maybe there's a death or a serious illness or, some big fuss. But get as much as you can from your predecessor. Try to improve some things along the way, and then have an exit strategy. A question we get a lot is, does a treasurer have to be a member? And the answer to that is, in the manual, yes. The treasurer, which is a board position, needs to be a member. However, I also, in brackets, when I say do what you need to do, if you're fortunate enough to have someone who does the books, but they're not a member, well, they can't be the treasurer. But maybe you have, maybe they do 90% of the work and the treasurer just does some reporting. Or maybe you find, just different ways to do it. But here's the thing: you do what you need to do. The finances need to be taken care of. And if your best local solution is a little offside, oh well. Now, our law department won't like me saying that, but the manual is supposed to govern all kinds of things. And again, ideally, the treasurer is a member. So now I'm going to talk about a couple of what to me were surprising tensions until I realized that my own church had them too. So the trustees are this really interesting construct. You don't have to have official legal trustee documents. 2,500 churches across the country can have church property held in trust with a bunch of named people without having all the paperwork. And it's all because of this United Church of Canada Act. And so trustees hold title. The best title you can have on your church property is owner, the trustees of XYZ church. And the reason that's good is it's true, and B, it means that you don't have to go to the land titles office every time you change a trustee. Now, I did learn that trustees sometimes feel like they can control it as opposed to operate as beneficial owners on behalf of the congregation board. So it's really important that, in those situations, I just point people to what it says in print. The trustees, do hold title, but they must comply with all decisions about congregational property that are made by the governing body and the regional council. And their only recourse is not to block something. Their recourse is to resign. Now, having said that, trustees are most often longstanding, well-respected members of the congregation, and they should, you should be working to have them on side anyway. So where there are active trustees, the trustees might look after investments. They might look after the property. They might have direct responsibility for that. Or that might be delegated. At my church, we moved a lot of that stuff over to me as treasurer. This was 20 years ago because the trustees forgot to pay the insurance bill. So there's different ways to do it, but the trustees hold title and have the accountability for signing all legal documents. So as I just mentioned, typically the trustees look after property insurance or the overall insurance of the plan, any capital maintenance plan that might exist, long-term investments, if you're lucky enough to have some, and of course they sign the legal documents. They act as stewards in property matters, but they aren't a separate organization, nor should they have a separate agenda. And so I keep saying that if there is some tension locally, as a treasurer, it isn't something you can, even you need to be sensitive to, but you need to bring people along over time to the basic way things work, which is it's the congregation voice expressed through the board that governs the church. So the UCW, I had my cute little joke there earlier, but it wasn't a joke. That was among the most important advice you'll get tonight. But one of the tensions that we have with UCWs is that they often have their own bank accounts. And that's fine. My own UCW did until I persuaded them otherwise. But they like to have direct control over their finances. At the risk of stereotyping, some of them like to have those old school bank book printouts where you can I don't even know if you can still get that, where you can stick it into the.
Not anymore.
But anyway, if the banking is consolidated, the treasurer's job is easier. You don't have to chase around to add up different stuff. The CRA compliance is easier. It might give you more cash flow, but you also have to respect the UCW history and rules. So the UCW guidelines say that they can have a bank account, for example, and at each level, it can be different, but they can have their own bank account. I take the view that if they in any way offer tax receipting in their fundraising efforts, then they can't say from a legal or CRA compliance point of view that they're not part of the church. So if the banking is consolidated, then the treasurer owns a duty to give the UCW all the same stuff they had with it, when it wasn't consolidated, when they had their own. So bank balance whenever they want it. The monies would be reported in a restricted fund so they can see the ins and outs, and they can get their checks very, very promptly, disbursements issued. And if it's consolidated, then it's already part of your financials. So you don't have to chase around to get some special report at the end of the year to add into your charity filing. If you have separate banking, then the treasurer must be provided with the information. And then the UCW has the duty to get timely information, any gifts to be received, all income, all expenses, all assets, liabilities, all their gifts, because the treasurer has to report all that stuff on the annual charitable return. And it doesn't have to, it could be just added to the accounting system once a year, but one way or another, the information needs to be consolidated for financial reporting to the CRA. Now here's a key point. Some places have 4 or 5 treasurers. I can't imagine even recruiting that many, but there was a day when there was an M&S treasurer, there was a trustee treasurer, there was a regular treasurer, there might be a outreach fund treasurer. That's all internal. The CRA only sees one treasurer, and it's you. If you're the treasurer who's on the board, it's you. They see one set of financial statements. They don't care about all those cute little separate reports in the annual report. They expect to receive one consolidated financial statement. And that means trustees, that means UCW, that might mean cemeteries, it could mean some other operating entity that you have that you run under the church charitable number. And just to say, this one treasurer, is the one that would sign the financial statement that you submit to the CRA with the annual charitable return if your statements aren't audited. So it's a big deal. The other thing I would say for a new treasurer, all of us are a little, I'm going to say, scared, or we tense up a little bit when we hear Canada Revenue Agency. If you get an email from them or a phone call or something, it's usually not good. So it's just human and normal to tense up a little bit. But the Charities Directorate is outstanding. They've really added to their online tools and stuff, but they are genuinely trying to help. They're not trying to gotcha. They don't get paid on how many fines they collect. They give warnings. Even their audit process is now sort of they call them educational reviews, but you still don't want to get caught out too badly. But the Charities Directorate is a service, and if anything, they increased that during COVID. They started liberalizing their rules. They started making it easier to get online and all that stuff. The collection side of the CRA is not where you want to be. So if there are payroll fines, those arise most commonly if you haven't, if you've got people that would legally be considered part-time employees and you've been treating them as self-employed and not taking source deductions. There are fines associated with that. There's penalties for improper disbursements or not having control. The collection side is where they actually look to impose financial penalties, and the collection side is to be avoided if at all possible. So that's sort of the high level context piece. I'm going to stop there, and then Clyde will pick it up with some more recent developments.
Sure. So let me step in before Clyde does, because there's a bunch of different questions that folks are talking to each other on the chat. So I'm not going to raise everything that's bubbled up, but there's a few things here. Can you tease apart the definition of envelope steward and treasurer?
I almost tempted to ask Clyde to do that, because I've never seen an envelope steward at my own church. But to the extent that the envelope steward is someone that administers the donations record keeping, it can be a separate function. It most often isn't. It depends how any congregation is resourced. But if they are separate roles, they have to work together. Clyde, would you add anything to that?
I would agree with you, Eric, that they have to work together. Your church does have somebody separate doing the data entry into Power Church, the envelope secretary role, but those reports have to balance with what's in the financial records. And if we don't work together, it just doesn't work.
So typically an envelope steward is the one who makes sure that donations from individuals are accounted for and people get their tax receipt at the end of the year. And that's a part of the financial function, right? Of the treasurer's function. So you could separate out the tasks, but it's the treasurer at the end of the day who carries the can.
The treasurer is responsible, but can delegate portions.
Right. Got it. Thank you.
That's one of the portions that the treasurer frequently delegates.
That's really helpful. Thank you. So you were talking about not giving money to benevolent monies to individuals, but to give gift cards instead. And somebody's saying, why are food gift cards acceptable and cash isn't?
Mhm.
What's the reasoning there?
Well, the short answer is audit trail, and I think also a degree of what it's used for. So if you're paying, even if you're paying a hydro bill or a rent bill, you've got a discrete benevolent act, and it's relatively immaterial. Anytime an amount gets bigger, the CRA is always going to use a lens of, hey, could or should I be taxing that?
So is that taxable income to the recipient?
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's sort of the high level lens. It's not that they're looking to, if you're giving $20 to an indigent person, but the idea is that there isn't a clear audit trail for that. And again, there's two separate elements. There's the audit trail part, and then there's the private benevolence piece. So, a bigger amount you shouldn't do through the church in any case.
Thank you. A couple of questions about trustees. Trustees, our titles have trustees that are long dead. What do we do?
Yeah, I love saying this in a church setting, so bear with me. You are not alone. Again, when I used to do the treasurer gig, I used to bet people that their named trustees, at least a third of them would be deceased, because the record keeping was really bad 10 or 15 years ago. Yep. If you need to do that, you need to go to the land titles office, and you may not even need a lawyer. Many municipal offices will accept an administrative correction, and we can give you the legal wordings and the whereases and to help update that. But you should fix it. Like if you're a treasurer, this is one of these things you should fix, because any number of people before you didn't fix it. And if you're ever in a situation where you need to put a mortgage on, or if you even sell part of the property, anything like that, all of a sudden that transaction's messed up and you have to go fix the title then. So if you know you've got a problem, feel free to flip me an email. I can send you some of the particulars. It's not that difficult, and in most cases you don't need a lawyer.
Thank you. And is there a conflict of interest if the treasurer is also a trustee? Is that legit?
Again, in the old days when we had a lot of our governance is bigger than we need it to be. When I started at my church, there was a 30-person board, and there were trustees on top of that. You take what you get, so you need to be clear on which hat you're wearing. But if you're a smaller congregation, you need to do what you need to do. It isn't specifically excluded, and it's not uncommon to have a treasurer who might also serve as a trustee.
Sounds good. Couple of questions about UCW. If the UCW,
Careful now.
Well, I think it's about the UCW and the relationship to church finances. So we're not going to step on any toes, but we want to make sure we're not. So if the UCW, this is an unusual church, the UCW has their own charitable number. Mm-hmm. In my church, that's not true, but in lots of churches it is. So if in this case, Paul says his UCW has their own charitable number, and they give money to the church, does the church give them an official receipt?
If they are a charity, and by the way, I don't know which Paul it is, but the last time I looked, there was exactly one UCW, and it was up in Northern Ontario, that had its own charitable status. There may be more. It's not something I look for carefully. But if they're a separate charity, everything I said changes. Then they're accountable to the CRA themselves, and the money that comes over is for them a gift to a qualified donee, and we on the church side report it as received from another charity.
And no receipt.
And no receipt. You can offer no tax receipt. You could offer just a regular receipt saying received from.
Oh, and a letter of thanks for sure.
Yeah, and by the way, that's true for money you get from any charity. If you get money from a charity, you do not give them a tax receipt. You give them
Canada Helps or Benevity or
you give them a
Habitat for
regular
Humanity or yeah. So here we've got a UCW whose income is totally driven by luncheons, pie sales, soup sales, and other fundraising. So they don't provide any charitable tax receipts because they're not getting donations. They're just raising money in fundraisers. Are they allowed to make donations from their UCW bank account to a group such as the Food and Shelter Group that operates totally on donations?
If the recipient is not a charity, see, this is where it gets muddy. The first test is that UCW, does it want to consider itself part of the church? If it operates in the name of the church, then I would argue that it could or should be, even if it's got a separate governance. If they're doing something in the name of First United Church, First United Church has some risk, not a lot with UCWs, but they have some risk. So if, on the other hand, if they want to make the case that they are entirely separate, then they aren't bound by charity rules, and they could give money to a non-qualified donee, for example. But it's really important here to see the facts. So I would suggest for that individual to email us if they want further clarification.
Okay.
You need to look a lot deeper than just on the surface on something like that, into their relationship and where they show up in church activity.
It's muddy, isn't it? Because the UCW was founded in a day when women weren't really in leadership. And so they were kind of the ladies' auxiliary. And they aren't anymore. Most of our board members are women, but they have an autonomy that no other church committee has. It's complicated.
Yeah.
Okay, relationship with another group. Relationship between the stewardship committee and the treasurer. How do you juggle that one? We've got a church here who says they don't want to talk to each other.
The first thing might be to understand, what the issues are. And again, we might need to take this offline. You're all on the same team. The revenue, the treasurer doesn't just keep score. The treasurer wants things to work. So to support the stewardship committee, for example, with information is a good thing to be doing. You might recall that last month we talked about the whole question of who should know about donation information. That's a common tension with stewardship committees, and you want to keep that as narrow as possible. So it depends again on what is being asked and what the tension is. But you're working to the same objective. You're trying to keep the church breaking even, right? And the treasurer needs the stewardship committee to be effective to do that. And the stewardship sure needs an effective treasurer to do that.
Well, and I'm just realizing as I'm reading this, we may have new treasurers online who don't understand all of our United Churchy jargon words.
Yeah.
So let's be clear. The stewardship committee is responsible for encouraging donations for the income side of the financial picture.
Exactly.
And so the stewardship committee is not doing fundraisers, but they're supposed to be encouraging generosity and inviting donations. So that's a significant contribution to the church's financial picture. And it might, I suppose, be one of those jobs that gets hived off in big churches and is all collected under the same person in small churches.
Absolutely. Again, larger places might have more committee and roles. In a smaller church, all of this can land with the treasurer sometimes.
I have one more question, and then I'm going to go back to you. I'm going to hold a question about cemeteries because we may get to it later. But Peter on YouTube is asking about a WCB account. I think that's a Workmen's Compensation Board account. Mm-hmm. He inherited one from a previous treasurer. He doesn't think he is needing it. He can't imagine a situation where he would make a claim. Is that a useful thing for a church treasurer to be thinking about?
It is actually, and let me answer it, because that's the kind of thing where a new treasurer comes aboard and goes, what's that about? I'll speak for my own church. I discontinue, and I'm, have a fairly fair-sized church with a number of employees. WCB in most provinces, workman's comp is optional. And if you have it, all your employees who are on the benefit program already are covered anyway for an accident that happens on the job through the restorative care program. So most churches, and if there's a significant expense associated with it, most churches have stepped back from having workman's comp coverage. Some churches choose to have it if they have lots of part-time roles that are below the benefit program eligibility. Benefits are mandatory if you have a job that's 14 hours a week or greater. Some churches, view it as a justice issue and will pay the workman's comp premium in order to have coverage for those individuals as well. But it's a good question, and happy to discuss your specific circumstance.
Okay, so thank you. So in a webinar like this, of course, we can deal in generalities. But if you have specific questions about your own particular situation, Eric is very generous with his time, and we'll give out his email at the end of the evening, or you can email me at United in Learning and I'll forward it along. Eric, I'm done for now. Go ahead.
Okay, we're turning it over to Clyde.
Okay, I'm going to carry on. We're going to get into some of the more mundane, some of the more practical things that treasurers are working with and need to be aware of. Online transactions are a must in today's world. Even without COVID, or as we can say, as COVID winds down or goes into the background of things and we carry on working, we're going to find more and more things being done online. And one of them that is very popular right now, but we tend not to be able to deal with it too much because of double signature bank accounts. But online banking is the norm. Everybody's looking for it online. Nobody wants a check. Nobody wants cash. They want paid online. What I'm suggesting would be to go to your bank branch manager and say, what can we do? You offer these online services. How can we effectively make use of them? And it might mean that you have to have another account, single signature account that you use for your payments, and just transfer funds into it as you need them. It's not the best, not the most ideal, because we all think of things in dual signature, but dual signature was great way back when we were handling cash, not when we're having automatic transactions. Pre-authorized remittance helps to get around that. And almost every utility company across this country will sign you up for pre-authorized, and they will take out the amount of your billings 10, 15, maybe even 20 days after the bill. So you know what's coming. Very few of them will take it right on the same day that the billing is sent out. So you've got ways of dealing with online payments for most of your regular payment made. And even in our United Church setup, M&S payments, assessment payments, any loans with the United Church, those payments can all be done through pre-authorized arrangements. And we have, if you follow this link that's here, we have the forms that are required to be completed and some instruction on how to work with that. Also, that was just touching the last line there was about have a way to receive online payments. And I think most of us have that after going through the last couple of years. With e-transfers being one of the biggest ones, but through other charities like Canada Helps, Canada Online Payments, Tithely, and a whole host of others. Another thing that, as the slide says, it's not optional anymore. Have access online to my business account. There are all kinds of things that can be done, and my recommendation is, as always, to have 3 people minimum with access, so that if something happens and one moves away, you're not stuck. You've still got something to work with. Church Hub for all the denominational things. As church treasurers, you have your own log into that, and you can get the statistical information for input, but you can also access your assessment notices. As soon as your statistical form is filed, your assessment notice is right there telling you what it will be next year. None of this waiting till the middle of December when we used to do it, send them out from the presbytery to tell you what your assessment was. ADP Payroll Online, if you're not online for even one of your employees, I would suggest strongly that you use it. It is great. One of the biggest things that we found in payroll in past when we were using the ADP, the older system, was that we weren't bothering to print off the payroll statements each pay. By law, we're supposed to hand those out every pay. And a lot of people just were not doing it, where right now on the new system, you can sign up for it and put in the email address and make it a unique personal email address, not a church-related email address. And they can then access their own payroll activity. They can get their pay statements and they can get their T4 forms online. And online banking comes back into it again. It's everything we do has to be online these days. And the more you can do online, the better you are.
Yeah. And Clyde, as I'm switching the slide here, I'll just say, is if you are a new treasurer and you don't have one of these options, we'll talk a little bit about, like, basically an alarm bell should be going off here saying, how do I get that if I don't have it already? Similarly on ADP, if for whatever reason you don't, if someone else handles it, great, but if you haven't authorized ADP and Angelica's team to be resources, there are forms to fill out to do that, and then you have way more support for your job.
The thing I find best is you can pull the reports where you need them, when you need them, not have to wait for somebody else to pull them and send them to you. So Church Hub, everything denominational, just about everything. And we'll go to the next slide, I believe is the one that shows a picture of Church Hub. This is from one of our pastoral charges out in the West. And it just shows that there are no fewer than 10 different buttons that you can use for different things. Mm-hmm. As a treasurer, as I mentioned, we've got the one in the lower left corner there, the annual statistics, and right next to it is annual assessment. If you happen to be, like I have been, on search committee, then I got log into this and I was able to access the community of faith published content, the record of calling a person, all sorts of extra things. So it depends on the roles that you have as to what access you have on here. But there's a lot of information that's tied up behind the scenes. Moving ahead into the CRA, if you are not online, I would strongly urge you to review the YouTube link that's on here. I reviewed it only about an hour before we started the session tonight. It is really detailed and good, and it walks you through the process. If you're having trouble getting online, start with going to the help desk with the United Church. I think it's Help CRA. Mm-hmm. And through that, you'll be able to get some tips. We can't necessarily answer everyone, but we can do many of them. And we can help you walk through some small steps along the way. There are 3 ways to get in. That's direct access to my business account through Rep a Client and sign in through web forms. If you get the web forms, it's a 4-digit number, I believe, and make sure you hang on to it because that's all your access and it does not change. Use that for access. Rep a Client is good if you want to have access to this one and more than one other. I use Rep a Client on all of mine, but direct access, again, on here, 3 or 4 people would be good, the same as it should be with access to anything that you're doing online. Even this is going online. This is for all your employees mainly. You can't read the fine print, but I finally figured it out when I was looking at it. GSC is Green Shields, and that's where all the benefits are paid.
Yeah.
Report them online and get payment through direct payment directly to the bank account of the employee.
Yeah, and this is just a cheap graphic, actually. The point being that the CRA wants to send you their money that way. Everybody wants to get paid this way, and we might as well get with the program.
Yeah, we've got to find ways to do things online. It's much easier, much quicker, and you can still have an audit trail doing it.
Mhm.
The same thing with claiming your HST charitable rebate. Varies across the country, so I can't talk a lot of detail on it, but if you can go online to my business account, you can file your HST or GST rebate online. And if you file it online with direct deposit, the money is in your bank account within 5 days. That's their target, and they meet it. I've had clients where I filed it and 3 days, 4 days later, they phoned me up and said, how come we got a deposit before I had a chance to tell them what we had done? So it works, it's good. And so we'll carry on from there to the next. Do we have to register for GST? The answer to that is no, you don't. If you provide taxable supplies, which most of us don't, and you're not a small supplier, in other words, you have more than $50,000 in any 4 quarters, doesn't have to be calendar quarters, it's any 4 quarters, consecutive quarters, then you have to register. But we don't have enough taxable supplies, generally speaking, to be able to warrant that. You can voluntarily register, but if you register, the way you get rebates changes, and you have to do a lot more bookkeeping to control how much you get on a HST rebate versus filing for HST refunds. And generally speaking, our churches never have to register, and they shouldn't. I've canceled registration for a number of churches because it just is not worth the extra work to you.
Yeah, and if I may, Clyde, the question I get most often is on rentals and whether like GST, HST is charged on rentals for commercial enterprises and so on. I have a CRA ruling, which I provide on request, which confirms that a charity doesn't have to charge HST on rental. And that's just another reason why we are very comfortable saying that we're exempt almost in all circumstances.
I agree with that, Eric, in that we are exempt on them and we don't charge it. However, in every one of the leases that I have been involved in, I make sure there's a thing in there that says if taxation ever changes and it's taxable because of the lease, then the person with the lease has to pay that tax.
Yeah.
I don't expect to see it happen, but that can affect property tax or it can affect HST, GST. So anyway, some tips to remember: churches are not registrants. We do not collect HST. If you have already collected some HST, you are supposed to refund it, or if it's a while afterwards, you have to report it and pay it. But try not to ever collect HST. You claim it twice a year. You can only claim twice a year in 6-month periods, tied to your date of, which is generally December the 31st. You can also go back 4 years if you haven't been claiming it. And this is not just HST, it's GST as well. You can go back 4 years. Provincial regulations for anything that you might claim provincially may vary from that, but the last time I was doing any provincial filings, 4 years was also available there. Yes, if we have a sale of an asset, it depends on who's buying as to whether HST is needed. And so we would refer you to that publication that's at the bottom there from the CRA RC 4082. It's a big document. I wouldn't recommend printing it off, but at least flip down through it on PDF form to page 21 and start reading.
Yeah. And
It's
folks,
very clear, very good.
for any new treasurers, this link is the same one we had earlier. We have separate, we don't have a recording, but we have webinar slides for a full presentation on how to do your annual charitable return or how to do your GST and HST filings. If there are any brand new treasurers out there that haven't done that yet. Back to Clyde.
Okay, we move on ahead. We'll worry about T3010. We've got some tips here. If you haven't already done it for 2021, think about it. We've got 2 months to get them completed and into Ottawa. Or, sorry, I think they now, if you're mailing them, they go down to PEI, I believe now. Your best way of doing them, if you can, and I know it means a lot of extra typing because they don't bring anything over from the prior year yet, but put them online. You can do it through my business account, and it's worth doing. When you put up the list of trustees, board members, if they are continuing in a elected role that you've got on that list, do not put a termination date, even though they're elected for 1 year only. If they're continuing, do not put that on. We have had a lot of churches end up on January 2nd with nobody that has authority to deal with their account because everybody terminated December 31st. And that is a significant problem. Going on to the next one, the 1236 form. That's where we list all of the donations we've given out to the different qualified donees. If you give $100 to another organization and they do not have a registration number, do not list it on this form. If they've got a registration number, list it, but do not list anything given to anything else, any other organization that's not there. And we reflect back now to the comments made earlier. You're not supposed to give to anyone other than qualified donees. So there are some circumstances where it might vary, and it depends on how you report it on your T3010. And then your tax receipts. There's a whole webinar through a CRA, a Charities Directorate, and a lot of print that tell you what it has to be on a tax receipt. If you are using one of the programs that is designed for Canadian tax receipting, everything should be there. But if you ever hear of a change coming, make sure it's current. If you've bought the program a few years ago, does it have, for instance, the CRA's website for charities? There's still programs out there that don't have it. If you're using manual receipts, it's not printed on there. So you have to put either a rubber stamp or a sticker on to make sure that that information's there. Make sure your receipting is done with current rules. And then whatever you do, file on time. We have a number of churches that go in default because they don't file their T3010 before the end of June. And it's a nightmare to go through and get your status back. And you could be hit with a $500 fine.
Okay, I'm going to interrupt just for a minute, Clyde, because Susan is saying here, brand new treasurer here, and these numbers don't make any sense to her. So what's a T3010? What's a T1235? What's a T1236?
They're all the same thing. T3010 is the information return for charities. It's like the T1, T2 tax forms for personal and corporate taxes, only we don't pay taxes. but
So
it's where we
this
report.
is a form that you send to the Canadian government, to the CRA every year, like your personal tax return, but you send it on
Absolutely.
behalf of the charity.
Yeah,
Yes.
and I guess what I would say to Susan too is it is the number one compliance requirement for a charity. So if the treasurer had one job only, it would be to make sure something got filed on time. And we do have a webinar that explains every form and literally goes through it line by line, which is on that link that we had earlier.
Yeah, and the T1235 is a portion of that T3010 return, which lists all your officers and directors. And so we suggest, using the church terminology, it's the trustees and the board members. And then the T1236 is where we report all the gifts that we've given to other qualified donees, that is, other registered charities. And they all have to be listed, and it's part of the reporting, detailed reporting that goes with a T3010 annual information return.
And I guess one more comment: if you're a brand new treasurer, you should find out if you're on the hook for last year, or if that was done for you. Very important.
And I would suggest you try and do that before the end of the week, just so that give yourself as much time as possible. Okay. Audits. Professional audits. If you can afford it, if you've got a large enough income base, it's worth it, because it gives everybody, part of the organization gives everybody a comfort zone with what's going on. Audits can range anywhere from probably in the ballpark of about $8,000 up. And I've seen some as high as $28,000 and $29,000. So you have to have reasonable amount of revenue stream in order to make it justifiable. If you don't go with an audit, go with a review. They're not quite as expensive, but they are there. They don't do the thoroughness of an audit, but they go through most of the things. And then there are other, what we call notice to reader or a compilation file, and that is the least costly. And you have to be careful with those. The one that costs the less is if you have somebody in your congregation who understands finances, but is not part of the financial decision-making process. Then they can come in and do an independent review, but they cannot pass an opinion on the books. They can say they've reviewed it, but that's as far as they can go. They can't say they look good or they look bad on paper. There's other ways of getting your message across. And I like the idea that's in the middle of this slide, where in the regions, and I know we've got some region staff members online with us tonight, but if any in the region in the positions that deal with the treasurers, if they can arrange treasure swaps, where you might review the books of another church and they'll review yours, that's the least cost, because you should do it. If you're each doing a swap, then you're doing it for a freebie. Volunteer with knowledge. And it's a great way to get to know your neighbors too. The disclosure to the congregation is important, and it helps to have everybody satisfied that the things have been looked at and properly dealt with. It doesn't necessarily do everything, but it helps. Okay, questions and answers on what's there.
Thanks, Clyde. And there are a few that have come in. I'll try to do this quickly. So you were talking about pre-authorized remittance for bills and stuff. Somebody's saying, should we set up all our utility bills to be sent and emailed to somebody or maybe log into the utility website? Or should it go to the church's office email, to the treasurer's email? How would you recommend?
I would suggest that you have a separate email for the church treasurer on the church email domain if they have their own, so that the billings like that don't get mixed in with the personal emails of the treasurer, but the treasurer has access to them. And then if the treasurer changes, that access can be changed to somebody else, to your successor.
Sure.
But if all the bills are there coming in that way and they're being paid, the notification of payment is all right there on the bill.
Yeah.
It's a great way to go.
Yeah, it's been very helpful in my church. Kathy asked, should we set up our bookkeeper on the CRA for the church?
The bookkeeper, in my experience, would be the CRA, would also have access to the ADP for reports. And if you can, set them up with a bank card with no withdrawals or deposits allowed, so they can get the bank statement within a couple of days of the end of the month.
Sure. Would you sign them off as a representative? How would you do that with the CRA?
With the CRA, a rep client.
Rep a client, okay.
If they're a paid bookkeeper outside and they're doing bookkeeping for others as well, they probably already have their representative login anyway. So they would just add you as another client.
Makes sense. John is concerned, wants to get a My Business account, but it requires the treasurer to disclose their SIN number.
In every case, the CRA wants to make sure they know who they're dealing with. And for the CRA, the SIN number is the only way they can tell. The CRA Charities Directorate, however, go with your name and your birth date. And that's why on the T1235 form, it's a birth date required. They do not have authorization to use SIN numbers. So the CRA collections area, very important to put your personal SIN number in. It goes with you, but it identifies you.
So they're not asking you to give your SIN number to anybody else in the church. They just want you to identify yourself to them, right?
That's right.
Okay.
And it provides an audit trail. The assurance I try to provide here, this is a common concern. They already have your social insurance number. They just want to have a record that you are an authorized person for the church. They already know your SIN number. They don't need to ask you for it, but they do want to link that for security purposes. So it is a normal thing. And the video that the YouTube link we showed explains that as well.
Thank you. Valerie says,
they may also ask for the information out of one of your income tax returns, most recent one, only because that helps to identify you if you're not already in their system for other purposes.
Yeah. Valerie asks, we have maintained our ADP account even though we lost our only employee last year. I'm assuming I'll be able to add a new employee fairly easily, but I don't check the ADP site very often right now because I have no need to. So should I be? Is there something there I should be noticing?
I'm going to defer that one to Angelica because I think she might have a better answer at it.
Thank you. And I'll just go through the presentation and hopefully you will answer the question.
Okay.
Okay, let's defer that.
That sounds good. Now, I am wondering, folks, it is about 15 minutes past the hour. We've been at this for 75 minutes. We're covenanted to end in about 15 minutes. And I'm wondering, I know you're only about halfway through the slides you prepared. Do you want to resume next month? What's your thinking on that?
Well, let me just say that quite a number of these I'm going to go through very quickly. The intent is to point people to information. I'm aiming for 8:30 for no other reason than I have the Raptors playing over here.
Well, I think that's important, and I haven't had supper yet. But
Yeah.
no, I mean,
Okay,
I think,
so
all
let's-
kidding aside, we did say these are up to 90 minutes and no longer. So I just want to be clear on that.
That's
I have
fair.
one more question for Clyde. Do assessments count as a donation when we're reporting on the T3010?
No.
No. Assessment is actually should be recorded on the line for membership fees.
Okay. Over
Thank
to
you.
Angelica.
Go ahead, Angela.
Over to me. The most important and critical role the treasurer plays and is to pay employees, and that is absolutely a must and important. You should be signed up with ADP, who is our payroll provider. The system that ADP uses at the present time for pastoral charges is TeamPay. It's a 24/7 system that you can access. It's a cloud-based system, and all your employees that are 14 hours plus should be in the system. This will facilitate pension and benefit administrations for each employee. So there should be one authorized treasurer to do all of the transactions, payroll transactions. And if you have a backup, that's great. But if you're needing to change that designated contact, just connect with our ADP, with our payroll team at UCC, and then we can help you through that process. There is quite a lot of training resources and tools that ADP has compiled, and they are located on the bridge. Again, we can help you access all of this information if you have some challenges. The biggest feature for TeamPay, as Clyde mentioned, is that your employees will have the ability to access their pay statements and T4s. Again, we have a user guide that it's going to detail some of the tasks related to payroll, which is, hiring new employees, making changes, adjustments, year-end, accessing reports, et cetera, all of these resources and tools, we have it on the bridge, ADP on the bridge, or you can connect with the payroll team at UCC, and we would help you with that. Again, lots of information on the bridge at ADP on how to do. There's webinars, there's live training sessions that you can access. Your payroll, if you don't have any changes and it's a status quo, you can have it set up as run as is. We can provide you what the roles and responsibilities for those are, any terminations, the ROEs, et cetera. We have forms that have formulas that can help you calculate pension benefits, et cetera. And again, these are all at the bridge, or you can access the payroll team to provide you some assistance.
Okay.
Well, I'm not seeing a link to the bridge in your slides, Angelica. How do people find the bridge? What is it?
So you actually have to be signed up for ADP TeamPay. And when you're in TeamPay, you should be able to access the bridge.
Thank you.
So we have quite a few resources at the unitedchurch.ca site, budgeting tools for treasurers, pastoral charge payroll services, the salary schedule, your pension benefits. You can find all kinds of information, a financial handbook for congregations. Again, if you're not able to find it, send us an email and we will help you find it. The email for ADP and the phone number is on the slide right there, and also for the payroll team at UCC.
Great. What's the response time on the payroll email, Angelica? Somebody's asking.
For ADP, it's at the present time, it has been slow, but we're working on making that better. But for our UCC payroll team, you should be getting something back within the day or 2 days.
Okay, somebody says they sent an email Monday and haven't had a response. I wonder if they put a typo in the email address then.
You should, we are a bit short staffed, but someone should have already responded. Today is what, the third day? Yeah. Please send me an email, or you can send an email to myself.
Okay. Monday was also closed for Easter, remember, but just right. Folks, for Susan, I think it was Susan that was a brand new treasurer here, or I think there was someone who didn't have any employees currently. The main thing to do here is make sure that you got an ADP account that you can access when you're going to need it. We can always reach out to get support to add that employee, particularly if you haven't had to do any transactions for a while. But right now, make sure you know what your ADP company code is, and make sure that you or someone is authorized, has authorized Angelica's team and are set up on this bridge thing.
Thank you. Angelica, a question here from Kathy. She's frustrated that she has to go in and authorize the payment every month. She didn't have to do that under the old system, and the payroll doesn't change. Does she have to do that, or can she set it up so that it goes back to the way it used to be?
If it's an as-is pay run, then you shouldn't have to go in. We recommend you checking it once in a while, but it should process automatically. So you can send me an email and I can follow up with ADP to ensure it's set up that way.
Thanks. Frustrating. Why doesn't ADP provide a manual for doing all these changes?
On the bridge.
On the bridge.
On the bridge. So that's
Exactly.
what the bridge is, basically. It's an online
Yeah,
manual.
all of the information related to any task, payroll task related, is on the bridge. And if you have challenges accessing it, please let me know and we'll help you through that.
Thank you. Brent and Karen are asking, how does staff get their pay statements?
Again, Team Pay gives you the ability to do so. So you need to request access to your treasurer and the treasurer has to allow it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good, thank you. I'm not seeing other questions for you, Angelica, so thank you.
Okay, and folks, I'm going to work to that 9-minute promise. I'm going to go a little faster, but most of this, again, is intended to, oh, hang on. You got to keep me on camera here for this.
It's my hand.
I've just been delivered my beer as well.
Well, there we go.
Thank you. Okay, moving right along then, folks, we're in the home stretch. Insurance is normally the responsibility of trustees, as we said earlier, but quite often the treasurer gets involved, especially in a smaller setting. And you'll be hearing, if you're a new treasurer, you'll be hearing more about insurance and some proposed changes that we're working on to reduce the cost of insurance. And I mean actually reduce, because we've all been hammered with huge increases over the last couple of years. Honorariums is an area that lots of places, they use, honorariums to pay for pulpit supply, various things. You have to issue, this is a CRA rule, not a church rule. You have to issue a T4, a source reporting form, if the total for the year is over $500. So asking visiting ministers for their social insurance number is just standard practice.
That's a T4A form, Eric.
Yeah, no, T4A is as it says here. Yeah. In some places, treasurers get an honorarium. Again, same rules apply. But generally, you have to be careful with T4As because there isn't source deductions taken. And it's also a red flag to the CRA that if you're giving honorariums to people who do custodial work or office work, they might be part-time employees. And on that note, most church staff are part-time employees as defined by the CRA. So even if you're not on the benefit plan with the 14 hours a week, you have to be taking at least EI, both the employer and employee portion, which is just another reason to have everybody set up on ADP. Another thing that a new treasurer, and if you bump into this, don't go to the wall right away, but most church-related events, the CRA wants its tax when it comes to income and so on. So, if there are weddings being done at your church or funerals, that is typically considered job-related income from a CRA perspective. And it is recommended that the fees be paid to the church and flowed through to the minister or the custodian or the music director as part of payroll. So that, and again, from a CRA perspective, that's so they're getting every CPP dollar, every EI dollar, and taking income tax where appropriate. Tax receipting correctly is the area that is most easily abused, frankly, because I mean, any one of us could type something up tonight if we wanted to, right? So it's important to know the tax receipting rules. We have separate webinars for this. Clyde mentioned that there are really good resources. If you just type Google CRA charitable tax receipting, you'll get access to all kinds of information, and feel free to send along any questions. We really I strongly recommend trying to avoid doing gift in kind receipting for all kinds of things. You have well-intended people who bring in a box of photocopy paper or even bushels of apples and all kinds of things. There is complexity and extra work for the treasurer to do gift in kind receipts. And I always encourage people to swap checks. The one exception to that is stock gifts. And many churches don't have a brokerage account to receive stock gifts. So we have the foundation, the United Church Foundation is set up to do that for you on a very cost-effective basis. Canada Helps will do it too, but it'll cost you more. And overall, gift in kind receipting, just saying, whenever you can swap checks, it's way less work. Again, when there's a desire to give money to someone, there are CRA tax rules. If it's an employee, there's no such thing in CRA world as a benevolent employer. So if you want to give even the minister a gift, like they call it a purse, I guess, when there's a minister's leaving or retiring or whatever, you have to be very careful with how that's administered if tax receipting's involved. Individuals can write checks themselves to give them to whoever they want. But once you flow it through the church books, a whole bunch of charity rules apply. So again, I'm going quickly tonight, but if you are new or have any questions about this, this is a textbook case of ask. Okay, so I'm going to keep going here because I'm trying to hit my 4 minutes. Working overseas won't apply to most of you, but here the message, and I've got a number of slides. You have to have direction and control over money's going. You can't just say, as well intended as something is, money goes astray every year to unscrupulous people and funding terrorism and all kinds of things. So there are a lot of rules around sending money or resources overseas. If you're sending money, there's lots of rules. If you're sending mosquito nets, there's less rules. And again, the way you can do it, the best way, the simplest way is to just donate money to an organization that's already set up to do that work. That's even true. That's why we encourage people to donate to mission and service. But if your church is involved in this way, look for a written agreement that has this concept of direction and control. And there's a chart that we won't talk about. And as I mentioned earlier, if it's money, the CRA cares and there are lots of rules. If it's something else, you have to be really careful with this. This is the area where I see United Churches fined most often. Be cautious, be thorough, plan overseas carefully, and consider choosing something that's easier to administer for the treasurer. Okay, I am going to run out of time. So for places where we have multi-point charges and your changes, reach out to me, but the slides are here. The CRA, sometimes the pastoral charge has the charitable number, sometimes it's the underlying points. So there's complexity in CRA reporting if you are in a multi-point situation. Please review these slides if you are, and they're quite self-explanatory, and I take you through how multi-points work. And then if you're making a change, if you're closing or if you're amalgamating, those are special situations that need special attention, and you should be reaching out to either your region or frankly to my folks. Because at the end of the day, I have to provide a letter to the CRA in every case when there's a change of that nature. Okay, so general rule, watch out for special situations. If in doubt, ask. And if you're new, ask anytime something sounds unusual. And here's a whole list of contacts for action. We're listing the web links and the key reference materials that are either online or available to you. And thank you very much. And my time says 8:29.
There you go. Well, it's a different time in each time zone, but you're coming in right on time. And let me reassure people again that all of those PowerPoint slides are available at the recording page at United in Learning. So you don't have to be madly copying down any of those email addresses. We make this available, and it's already up there and posted now. You can run right over there now and get it if you want to. So United in Learning, click on webinars and then recordings, and you can even look on search on webinars for church treasurers, because it's got its own little separate spot if you want to find it there. But you should be able to find all of those resources. Thank you. Thank you to each of you, Clyde and Angelica and Eric, for the work that you've done pulling this together. I think even for people who've been around the barn for many years, there was information in each one of those, for each one of those folks. I know I've got a couple of takeaways from my treasurer that I've carefully noted down. I also want to reiterate the note that I put in the chat, and that is that we kind of ran out of time for all of the questions. There are a few more questions in the chat that I know have not been answered. The presenters will get a copy of all of the questions that come up in the chat. And if they already know who you are, you might well get an email from them within a few days saying, I saw your note and here's my answer. If they don't know your email, it's harder for them to respond, but you're welcome to email them directly, or you can email me and I'll forward it along. One way or another, we can offer responses to kind of general questions that everybody across the country will find applicable, but things that are specific to your church or to a specific sort of small number of churches, we've had to skip over tonight just because there's been so much to deal with. Thank you. Thank you for joining us. We're back to our regular fourth Wednesday of the month in May. I'm not sure what the topic will be yet, but Eric always has something up his sleeve ready to go. So we'll look forward to seeing you then. And again, let me just close the way that Eric opened by acknowledging the importance of this ministry that you offer, and our thanks for the time and energy and behind the scenes efforts that you put into making sure that your own congregation and we together as the church are able to do God's mission in this world. Blessings to you, and we'll see you next time. Bye for now.
Steve, are you splitting us out? We are.